The Treasurer wanted some big ideas ahead of this month's roundtable on reforming the Australian economy, and he's getting them. From tax to artificial intelligence, all sorts of proposals are rolling in. This morning, we're going to hear from one of the most influential groups with this government, the union movement. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Last time the government held a reform summit, the ACTU was the big winner. It came away with a raft of changes from Labor in its first term, much to the frustration of business groups. This morning we'll hear the union movement's wish list ahead of the Treasurer's productivity roundtable being held in just over 2 weeks. The ACTU's Sally McManus joins us. She wants the government to be ambitious. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, is being cautious in his approach on the Middle East. Anthony Albanese's not yet joined other like-minded leaders in declaring plans to recognise a Palestinian state. But it's clear that's where he's headed, as frustration builds over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
The hunger crisis haunting Gaza.
Absolute chaos and desperation of people fighting for food.
Israel has relented to some of the international pressure put upon it.
What a bold-faced lie. There is no policy of starvation in Gaza.
That's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that.
There is no starvation in Gaza.
A claim Anthony Albanese says is beyond comprehension.
Do you believe there is starvation in Gaza?
I've been incredibly distressed by the images that I've seen.
But do you believe that that's evidence of starvation?
It's a complex situation on the ground.
The UK will recognise the state of Palestine in September unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza.
I am not in that camp.
Mr. President,
because if you do that, you really are rewarding Hamas.
Canada intends to recognise the state of Palestine.
And I didn't like that. Not a deal breaker.
Western governments now coordinating as they wind up pressure on Israel over the Gaza horror.
Australia is under increasing pressure to recognise a Palestinian state.
There is a moral momentum now that we are all witnessing.
The people of Palestine have a right to a state, and it should not be used as a bargaining chip.
We welcome other comments by the countries of the Arab League condemning Hamas.
Sometimes out of a crisis comes a moment of opportunity.
I never thought I'd live in a country where a Labor Prime Minister would take steps towards both emboldening and rewarding terrorism. Hamas is a militant terrorist organisation.
I think Australian recognition of a state of Palestine is a matter of when, not if.
We won't be driven by a time frame. What we'll be driven by is when the recognition of Palestine can make a contribution to the creation of two states.
My guest this morning is ACTU Secretary Sally McManus. First, let's check what's making news. Hamas says it won't disarm unless an independent Palestinian state is established. Israel is demanding Hamas lay down arms as a key condition for any end to the war. But in a statement overnight, the listed terrorist organisation says it will only do so if an independent Palestinian state is established, with Jerusalem as its capital. Tens of thousands of protesters, meanwhile, are expected to march on the Sydney Harbour Bridge today over Israel's actions in Gaza. The Supreme Court rejected a New South Wales police bid yesterday to prohibit the march. It will be the first anti-war demonstration on the bridge. And the Victorian Labor Party's called on the Albanese government to immediately recognise a Palestinian state. Delegates to the ALP State Conference also overwhelmingly voted for Australia to suspend participation in AUKUS, pending a parliamentary inquiry into the deal. And some news we can reveal this morning. Former political rivals are teaming up to help boost the number of women in politics. An organisation called Women for Election that helps train and prepare women to run for public office has appointed a cross-party board of advisors. It includes former Liberal, Labor, Greens and Independent figures, including Karen Andrews, Linda Burney, Zoe Daniel and Rachel Seward. The Prime Minister has unveiled plans at the Garma Festival in East Arnhem Land for a new economic partnership aimed at boosting Indigenous wealth creation. The ABC's Bridget Brennan is there at Garma, joins us now. Bridget, good morning to you. Tell us about this plan and does it differ to the many previous attempts we've seen over the years to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians?
Good morning to you, David, from here in beautiful Gulkula in northeast Arnhem Land, on the lands of the Gumatj clan of the Yolngu Nation here for the 25th Garma. It's been a very significant one. As you said, the Prime Minister arriving yesterday for quite a brief visit to Garma, although there were many Cabinet Ministers here visiting the festival, some for the first time, to have a look at what's going on here in remote Australia. Look, what the Prime Minister has done is put the meat on the bones of an economic strategy and focus that he foreshadowed at Garma last year. Now, last year, very much there was a lot of distress really post the referendum that obviously ended in a big no vote around the country on that question of a voice. And so the Prime Minister had said he wanted his government to shift its focus to pragmatic actions and to economic development in Aboriginal communities. Now we've heard what that could look like. Tens of millions of dollars for First Nations groups to really get better investment in clean energy projects on their land. And we know that renewables and clean energy is going to be such a powerhouse in our economy. It's so important for our energy transition. The Prime Minister really saying, listen, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people need to be part of this new section of the economy. We know that a lot of Aboriginal people own quite a lot of land across Australia, a big landmass, and there is a First Nations economy that's really burgeoning and presenting a lot of opportunities for our mob. But I think there is a sense here that the devil's in the detail. We need to make sure that people who perhaps aren't skilled up yet need to be getting access to this strategy. The Prime Minister is also announcing some work to be done around TAFE and remote TAFE centres so that people can get skilled up around the country. So it was interesting and positive, I think, for the government to be really putting First Nations people at the centre of their productivity agenda. There's a lot more work to be done on educating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and also just a sense that this can't be just a narrow focus. We've got a lot of closing the gap targets not being met, and if they're not being met, you cannot economic development your way out of a lot of people not going to school or getting the proper education, and indeed a lot of people in detention from a young age.
Yeah, look, it's a good point. You mentioned those close the gap figures. We saw the latest just the other day from the Productivity Commission, and once again, Bridge, they're pretty depressing, still going backwards in 4 areas, including incarceration rates, and particularly bad progress or lack of progress there in the Northern Territory. What's been the focus there at Garma on what needs to happen? Because we know the Territory's government, the CLP government there, has really adopted this tough-on-crime approach. Is that what's now being seen in these close-the-gap figures?
These close the gap figures are not just distressing, they are heartbreaking, because these targets that are worsening are the worst ones. They are our people taking their own lives. They are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in jail, and in jail for the trajectory of their life from a young age. They are children in vast numbers in the out-of-care home system. And the Prime Minister didn't really address that in his speech yesterday. So there was a little bit of disappointment here, because this has been a big talking point for people here. And I had the chance to speak to the Productivity Commissioner, Selwyn Button, about this. And he really put quite a strong statement forward saying what the Commonwealth could, he didn't say they should, what they could look at, one lever they could look at is funding arrangements with states and territory governments. He says state and territory governments cannot ignore that some of their legislative decisions are causing those closing the gap targets, which is a big national agreement, to go backwards, and that we now need some attention into the decisions governments are making to actually worsen the closing the gap statistics. And that specifically goes to, as you said, law and order, tough on crime, bail laws that we're seeing around the country. Here in the Northern Territory, there are soaring numbers of Aboriginal people going to jail. There is a law and order disaster really looming in jails across the Northern Territory. And that has been an enormous talking point here. People are extremely distressed by it because you have 11-year-old children in watch houses over weekends being held in solitary confinement, sometimes with the lights on for 48 hours. So there are human rights concerns. The land councils are concerned. They cannot get meetings with the Northern Territory government. It should be said there is a Northern Territory Cabinet Minister here, Steve Edgington, a former Tennant Creek Mayor, who is meeting with people here at Garma, but there is a lot of anger. In fact, one of the independent politicians, Northern Territory politicians, Mark Gayula, said Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory have begun to fear the Northern Territory government, and he said that their children are being treated like animals in the Northern Territory. So this has been a very, very important Garma. Those concerns are being raised. I understand many cabinet ministers are concerned about it and have been having meetings, closed-door meetings here at Garma about it, and there are calls for the federal government to do something. Now, what they could do is make some pretty critical funding decisions with their relationship with the Northern Territory government. The Commonwealth by and large funds the Northern Territory and all of the different services that go across this place. The Indigenous Affairs Minister, Malarndirri McCarthy, is deeply concerned about what's happening, in particular to children in jails and watch houses. However, she's resisted calls for the federal government to intervene, but she did hint that the Northern Territory government needs to be listening, and in fact the Education Minister, Jason Clare, said the money that goes to the Territory is not a blank cheque and that it has to be tied to outcomes. Have a listen to what Malarndirri McCarthy said here at Garma.
It is important to be very aware of the fact that nearly 80% of the funding of the Northern Territory comes from the Commonwealth, and that's not just for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people or projects, that's actually for all citizens of the Northern Territory. So we have to be very responsible at the Commonwealth level about how we respond to those requests.
Bridge, concern, we'll see whether that turns into any funding pressure from the Commonwealth on the Territory government. Look, just quickly, Susan Lee, the opposition leader, is not there at Garma. She is instead spending a few days in the Kimberley, visiting some communities there. What do you make, what's the significance of that decision?
Yeah, it's a bit of an unusual decision to not be at Garma this year because I think that Aboriginal people here, a lot of Aboriginal people here at Garma, and there are a lot of Aboriginal people here, not just from the Northern Territory and from Arnhem Land, but from around the country, would have liked to have heard what the Coalition's refreshed policy agenda is going to be in Indigenous affairs. Susan Lee and her shadow Indigenous Affairs Minister, Karen Middleton, who is a countrywoman here from the Northern Territory, instead choosing to do a tour of some remote communities in WA, which, look, is welcome. I think they had a focus on healthy birth weight and some of the issues facing Aboriginal women across remote areas of WA as well. But probably it would have been an opportunity, as I say, for Susan Lee to put forward that Indigenous Affairs refresh, which we haven't yet heard much from the Coalition. But Julian Lisa has been here, someone who supported the Voice and has been a passionate advocate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, having a lot of conversations around the place. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether the Coalition and indeed the Greens work in concert to put pressure on the government to fix some of those closing the gap targets. And this is what Susan Lee had to say in Kununurra.
What I heard from the Prime Minister at Garma yesterday was insufficient. The scale of his response doesn't match the scale of the challenges. And he said he would be judged on his actions.
Yeah, Susan Lee, maybe they're signalling a more significant, a more sufficient response from the opposition to deal with those issues when it comes to closing the gap. You can see the wind picking up there at that beautiful site you're at. Bridget Brennan, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Spearsy. We're missing you here.
I'm missing being there as well. Maybe next year. Thanks, Bridge. And I did have a chat with Thomas Mayo for the podcast this week as well, a leading Voice campaigner. He talked about those close the gap figures, what needs to happen, but also his call for a Voice still to be legislated. You can catch that with the QR codes that are there on screen. We're going to return though now to the issues around the pathway towards Palestinian recognition and bring in our panel. We're joined by Karen Middleton, John Kehoe and Patrica Karvelas. Very good morning to all of you. So Karen, on this, we're seeing movement from the French, the British, the Canadians when it comes to saying their plans to recognise a Palestinian state, albeit with slightly different conditions. Anthony Albanese is not at that point yet. Why?
I think it's all about the timing. I mean, we basically know from the government that they will do this. What they're waiting for is to get maximum impact from an announcement. So we've seen these announcements rolling out. They're clearly coordinated. We saw the French and the British targeting the Israeli government, the Israeli side, I guess, placing conditions that emphasise that. We saw the Canadians placing conditions that emphasise change on the Palestinian side, the removal of Hamas and reforms to the Palestinian Authority. We've had a statement from the Palestinian Authority in June giving undertakings to that effect. We've seen the Arab League make some statements also condemning Hamas.
And that's significant.
It is. It's the first time some of those key countries have ever done that, and there's talk of a UN-backed stabilisation force, which of course is the next stage after recognition. How do you create a state that undertakes or guarantees the security of Palestine as a state and the security of Israel? Anthony Albanese is waiting to target Australia's decision to get maximum impact, to increase the pressure. We don't know exactly what the point is yet that he wants to do that or what he's going to try and achieve.
And that's a good point to make. It's fascinating to see these countries, US allies, moving around the US on such a big diplomatic point as recognising a Palestinian state. I mean, it tells us a bit about what's going on globally at the moment. But on that point, John, that Karen makes, the PM, we know his conditions have been consistent. No role for Hamas. Israel needs some assurances around its security. And look, he laid them out on this program last week as well.
So we won't do any decision as a gesture. We will do it as a way forward if the circumstances are met.
Yeah, if the circumstances are met, he says, but is there some wiggle room there as to a judgment call on exactly what circumstances need to be met, or at what point those circumstances need to be met to take this step of recognising a Palestinian state?
Yeah, well, it's going to be a delicate decision, I think, in terms of timing, because there is a lot of preconditions that still need to be met, such as the safe return of the Israeli hostages as well, the removal of Hamas from power there, or any sort of role in governing. Also, I think the right for, or the recognition for the right for Israel to exist as well. And a ceasefire, obviously, too. So I feel like the PM is got to be careful, and he is so far not putting the cart before the horse. The UK seems to be leaning more heavily into it. France and Canada have a bit more of a nuanced position. Trump's words around it have also been interesting, because he's spoken about how there is starvation there, but when Canada came out with its statement, saw forward leaning towards recognition of Palestine, he threatened that this could interrupt their trade negotiations between the US and Canada as well. So there's a few moving parts.
That he withdrew it, though, and I think that's key. I think the Trump
changed his mind.
I think the interesting thing with Trump, actually flipping that, is his lack of threat, or his lack of trying to put the hard word on the UK, on France.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think his reaction to the British and the Canadians is actually, on the scale of things, been pretty mild.
I think it's been really mild. I think the interesting thing about the Albanese way he's doing this is there's a couple of angles for me. One of them is that he is almost trying to build a consensus with the community. Why is he doing media interviews, talking about it at length without an announcement? He's trying to build the case for recognising and trying to bring the community with him. And I think that's really an interesting approach. He also now has...
I mean, he'd love to bring the Americans with him too, to be clear, because they're the ones with the most influence here.
Yeah, but I don't think he's built that relationship yet with Trump, or he's having that influence himself. I think the most likely person to be able to do that out of the list of countries is actually Keir Starmer, who does seem to have quite a kind of significant relationship. But the other key factor for the Prime Minister is he has probably the least pressure of everyone out of the group of countries. So he can make the call.
Internal pressure you're talking about.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So Ed Husic really has been doing all the heavy lifting on this question of Palestinian rights, on what's going on in Gaza. Internally, there are many in the Labor Party who are concerned, who are raising this, but they aren't prepared to go out and be public about it. They are trusting the Prime Minister and Penny Wong to work it out, and I think that's really interesting. It's very different to Keir Starmer's situation.
In the global context, what is also really unclear, aside from the US and how they get to the table, is how Hamas gets back to the table and how Israel gets back to the table. And I think the really interesting thing in the statement you quoted from Hamas this morning is there is a deliberate sort of stinking dead cat thrown into the middle of that, they bring up Jerusalem.
We want Jerusalem.
That is sort of at the heart of the intractable nature of all of this.
Hamas is not saying it's going anywhere. It's saying we will disarm.
Yeah.
But that's not what Australia, it's not what the Palestinian Authority are saying. They're saying no role for Hamas. It is, certainly in Australia, a listed terrorist organisation.
Yeah, so the momentum is building behind that position around the world, and including in the Arab and Muslim states and the Palestinian Authority, but not with Hamas just
But how that's resolved is still unclear.
Yes.
There is no pathway to how it's resolved at all that has emerged. But what clearly all of these countries are doing is trying to, put their foot on the accelerator.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if they don't, nothing is going to happen. And you do need pressure on both sides. They both have to recognise the other one's existence. And let's not forget, and I've been trying to put pressure on the coalition MPs this week who've been more resistant and really taking Netanyahu's words as if
Well, just on
gospel.
that, let me just show you that, because, the coalition throughout this war has played a very pro-Israeli stance, no doubt about it. Susan Lee was pressed this week on whether she agreed that what we're seeing in Gaza amounts to starvation. Have a look.
Do you believe there is starvation in Gaza?
I've been incredibly distressed by the images that I've seen, incredibly distressed, as has everyone around the world.
You haven't answered my question. Do you believe that there's
Can I just move on?
Sorry, you've been asked twice now.
I've said I'm very distressed by the images that I've seen.
But do you believe that that's evidence of starvation?
It's a complex situation on the ground. Like everyone, I'm very distressed by the images I've seen.
Our fellow panellist Anna Henderson, they're trying to get an answer on that. But what's that about? Because PK Donald Trump has said, it's clear there's starvation. Susan Lee won't say that.
This is about Susan Lee and her right-wing flank in her party trying to ensure that she doesn't aggravate them. Now, it's particularly curious the way she handled that, because she does have a history of being a pretty pro-Palestinian MP. She's clearly shifted on some of those issues.
And she says because
But this is bizarre, right? Like, what, you contesting starvation? I mean, I had Dave Sharma, who was ambassador representing Australia to Israel, is known as a pretty pro-Israel voice in the coalition, who had no trouble identifying what's going on the ground and critiquing the Netanyahu government, and those...
He's not trying to hold together a fairly
Well, you can be pro-Israel and criticise the behaviour of the Netanyahu government. It shouldn't be so hard to do, and it just shows the vulnerability of Susan Lee. I thought that was one of her weakest points as opposition leader.
So just quickly, bottom line, will the PM do this, recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly towards the end of September?
The timing is the question, whether he wants to do it there or before there. But he doesn't. He said he doesn't want to do it to a deadline. He doesn't want to do it to a sort of some kind of in a performative way, or just because there's an event going on. He wants to get maximum leverage from an announcement, in whatever form that is, to achieve what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So what would be your guess, John?
I don't think he should be bound by some arbitrary timeline just because other countries are moving in that direction. I think the more important thing is you get tangible outcomes.
Yeah, and that's what he keeps saying he wants to see happen. Well, time to talk to ACTU Secretary Sally McManus. To take us there, here were the British and Canadian Prime Ministers on recognising a Palestinian state.
The UK will recognise the state of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace.
Canada intends to recognise the state of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms.
Sally McManus, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So just briefly on this issue, should Anthony Albanese join his counterparts in taking this step?
Look, we're a movement for peace, David, and we've been calling for peace there since the horrendous events on October the 7th and what's happened since then. The number of innocent people now being, killed is in the tens of thousands, and now people are being starved. So we think it's urgent that our government does recognise Palestine as a state, and we need to do this urgently. And the reason is because people are starving.
So do it now.
Children are starving, David. We should do it now.
All right. Let's turn to the government's reform roundtable that's coming up in just over 2 weeks. What are the proposals you're putting forward, particularly in the area of tax?
Well, one of the biggest issues in terms of living standards for younger people in Australia is the issue of housing affordability. It's like the number one issue, and we need to address it. Young people should have the same aspirations as the generations before them, and at the moment they don't. It's been wiped out by the fact that the housing prices have gone up twice the rate of wages over the last 25 years, twice the rate. Now, supply is part of that issue, and we've got proposals around that, but we also think that the tax system has to change too, because that has fuelled those housing prices and taken it out of reach for young people.
So are you talking about negative gearing and capital gains tax breaks?
So we're going to take a proposal that both negative gearing and capital gains tax should be reformed, that they should be limited to one investment property and grandfathered for the existing arrangements for 5 years to allow people to adjust.
So sorry, for 5 years you can
keep current arrangements.
But after that you can only have one negatively geared property?
Yes, and so you can have as many investment properties as you want, but in terms of the tax benefit, limit that to one. The issue isn't, ordinary Australians that are trying to get ahead and have an investment property. That's not the issue. The issue is that a small number of investors, and we're talking about 1% of investors, own 25% of the investment properties, and that has been driving or fuelling the housing prices. And so I don't think we ever intended even this to happen as a result of these tax measures, but this is where we're at. And unless we change it, working people can't live where they work, they can't live where they grew up. It is causing an enormous amount of pressure for people, and a really disturbing thing is that a study in New South Wales said that there will be no grandchildren in Sydney because people between the ages of 30 and 40 can't afford to live there.
What about capital gains tax? What's your proposal on that front?
Exactly the same, that capital gains tax and negative gearing.
So 5 years
as it is, and limited to one investment property.
After the 5-year mark.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's a long history of debate around both of these tax measures. Labor in 2019 under Bill Shorten took changes to, slightly different, but changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax to that election and lost. And since then, Anthony Albanese, as leader, has said, well, that was the verdict of the Australian people. And he took that position at the election earlier this year as well. Would it be a broken promise for him to now shift on these issues?
Well, I just say that we've got to bite the bullet. Otherwise we're just saying, too bad, young people, you're not going to be able to ever own a home, forget about even thinking about it. Since 2019, the problem's just got worse. It's going to continue to get worse. Unless the government's brave enough to do something about it, we are just abandoning those generations, and we think that's fundamentally wrong.
Have you done any work, any modelling on the impact this would have on the rental market in particular? Because the criticism or the argument for not doing something, for not touching those rules, is that it would drive up rental prices and limit rental stock.
That's why you have to increase supply as well, and the government's already got a whole lot of measures with that, and we've got other proposals too. We think the government should get behind modular housing. It's quicker and it's faster and it's cheaper in terms of producing those houses. Also, the rules around superannuation funds investing in housing are too limiting, and that's holding back investment in housing as well. We'd also be open to sensible proposals around speeding up approvals. Like, you've got to also increase the supply of housing alongside changing the tax measures.
But what would this raise in terms of tax revenue if these limits that you're talking about were put in place on negative gearing and capital gains?
We think around 1.5 billion a year. We think around that, maybe a bit more.
Okay, so you'd be talking, what, 6 billion or so over the forward estimates in tax saving for this, but it would obviously hurt those investors who are currently in the market after the 5-year mark. Is there any work done on what the impact would be for them?
Well, I mean, people will have time to adjust and to make decisions they want to. Part of the problem is that we've been keeping a whole lot of capital in housing, and it's not those people's fault. Like, they've done that because it's worked for them and they've made smart decisions around that. But It's also meant that capital's not being invested in areas that are going to increase productivity, like Australian businesses and other ways it can be invested. At the moment, it's all been locked up in housing, and so that's another part of the productivity question.
The other tax measure that Labor under Bill Shorten took to that election was on franking credits. Is that something you're saying Labor should come back to now?
No, it's not one of the proposals we're putting forward, but we are putting forward other proposals. Working people in Australia pay, our tax, our fair share of tax. You and I, David, pay our fair share of tax. We want to see everyone pay their fair share, and at the moment, there's too many loopholes and too many ways that the very wealthy can get out of.
So, what are you suggesting should happen there?
So, quite a lot of measures here, because we've also got a problem in terms of really big, extremely profitable companies not paying tax as well. Go through the list of them, everyone from Netflix to News Corp, right through to Glencorp, the insurance companies, all of those, very profitable, not paying tax. So we would say this, the tax measures that should be brought in is for family trusts. We think that there should be a minimum 25% paid on disbursements. So a minimum family trusts have become a way of people basically hiding their money and getting out of paying tax. But also say for millionaires or people, not millionaires, people who had income of $1 million in a year should pay a minimum tax rate of 25%. We think that's more than reasonable given that your average worker pays more than that. At the moment, there's 91 people who had an income of that amount, paid no tax at all, David, and that it's just not on. And also, got a situation where the nurses of Australia pay more tax than the oil and gas companies, and so we'd also propose a 25% on the revenue from gas exports in Australia.
Well, it brings us to what the Productivity Commission's put forward ahead of this roundtable just the other day in relation to company tax, and just to broadly explain it, it would lower the company tax rate from 30% to 20% for all businesses, all companies with a turnover under $1 billion, but then also introduce this 5% turnover tax on their cash flow for every business, large and small. So the biggest businesses would face a higher tax rate. It sounds like you're open to this idea?
Thing is, the big problem we've got is that Australia is dominated by a relatively small number of companies in a small number of industries, and they are very, very profitable. And they don't want to pay more tax. They yell and they scream every time it's any proposal, even though 31% of companies aren't paying any tax at the moment. And what they've been doing is prioritising short-term profits over investing in productivity, in capital or in research or in people. And so that's got to change. And the only way to change that, we think, is to make sure that whatever proposals come forward lead to investment in things like capital and research. And this proposal is something we will look at in more detail because it does do those things. And, all the calls to cut company tax, in the end, will hurt ordinary people because that's money out of Medicare, money out of education.
But it's, the Productivity Commission makes the point that we need to lower that company tax rate to encourage investment, dynamism in the economy.
No, we don't.
Well, this is, I just want to show you, this is from the Productivity Commission's submission. At the moment, in yellow, is where our company tax rate is compared to the developed world. We've got one of the highest rates. If it's lowered to 20%, we get one of the lowest rates in the OECD. Do you accept that this is an important way to encourage investment?
See their island? Ireland's basically, a tax haven. And that doesn't benefit the people of Ireland, doesn't benefit them at all. There's no evidence whatsoever that lower tax rates are going to lead to more investment. And why would it? At the moment, these companies have got very significant profits and they're choosing not to invest. They're choosing not to put it into a better, capital, more machines, different, research, and all their people. What, we're going to give them more money and expect they're going to change their behaviour?
Just before we move on from tax, though, your priority is clearly coming back to where we started, negative gearing, capital gains tax, these housing tax reforms. Do you expect that this Albanese government would be bold enough to go back to something that's burnt Labor in the past?
Well, it's also the other tax measures we raised as well, so it's not just those. We want to see living standards rising, and they're not going to rise unless we address housing affordability. It's number one issue for working people.
But
it's
you know
eating into everything.
You know the people in this caucus and these ministers and this Prime Minister. Do you get the sense that they're going to be brave enough to do these measures?
Listen, we're going to go and argue it. We're going to advocate for it. In the end, I guess the government will make their decisions based on what they think is in the national interest. We would say it is in the national interest.
What if it's an agenda for the next term, beyond the next election?
Well, we'll just see it become more and more unaffordable over that period of time.
I want to ask you about artificial intelligence as well. This is going to be an issue at the roundtable too, and it's a technology that's already upon us and is going to be more and more part of our lives and part of our economy. Jim Chalmers argues that artificial intelligence will completely transform our economy. Every aspect of life will be impacted. Does the union movement accept that there will be some jobs that need to be made redundant and others created as part of this revolution?
Well, of course that's going to happen. What we want to stop is mass job losses just being imposed on people. Every good company, and I'd say it's in their interest to sit down with their workers to talk about their plans and how it is going to affect them, and then negotiate with them what that will mean. So it might be that people choose to take a redundancy, but it might be that the company says, well, we're going to invest in training you up. When you do that, you give people the safeguards and the comforts to embrace AI. If you don't do that, you're going to have a situation where there's going to be a very big depth of fear and also resistance to the use of AI. And AI, unlike other technologies, needs humans to engage with it to make it work. So it's in the interest of all of us that this is a shared thing, and that means you can't just dispose of workers.
We had an example just in recent days of the Commonwealth Bank, which does employ nearly 50,000 people. It confirmed it made 45 call centre workers redundant. They're being replaced by AI, and a spokesperson for the bank said many of our people have taken up the upskilling and reskilling pathways made available for them to continue their careers at the bank. Is that the right approach?
Well, this is the point, isn't it? If you negotiate with your employees and you're honest with them and saying, listen, actually, we are going to replace your jobs, but what we're going to guarantee to you is that we're going to invest in training you up to do other roles. And if you're a bank, there's plenty of other roles that you can do so. Then people are going to be less worried about it. That's not exactly what the Commonwealth Bank did, unfortunately.
But do you need a new authority to police this stuff? And the government doesn't sound too keen on this idea.
Well, the thing is the issue of AI is about workers, but not just about workers. There's lots of other issues. Obviously, there's issues about pornography and how that works. There's also about data theft for creative industries like media, people having their data and what they've created being stolen.
Sure, and they're all legitimate concerns. They're very legitimate concerns. But do you accept that, again, if Australia puts too many rules and regulations around the rollout of AI in place, investment's going to go elsewhere where they can advance a lot faster?
Well, it's the tech bro billionaires that absolutely want, and Donald Trump, no regulation whatsoever. I tell you what, I don't trust them, and that I think that we've got to put the interests of people first, not the interests of their profits.
Sally McManus, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
This morning. Coming up, Donald Trump is keeping the tariff rate on Australia at 10%. Should we be celebrating that decision, or is that still a concern, something that should be pursued? We're going to talk about that. Let's get back to the panel, though. We're joined once again by Karen Middleton, John Kehoe and Patrica Karvelas. Karen, tax. We just heard there the ACTU is submitting to this roundtable that Labor should go back to those negative gearing and capital gains tax issues, amongst other reforms. But those two really jump out, don't they?
Well,
we all have political memory here.
How interesting, isn't it? The government is encouraging what it's calling radical ideas, or ideas that might be controversial. They've defended the Productivity Commission's ideas on tax that you just went through with Sally McManus on that basis. This is adding another layer, isn't it? Now, this whole process of the roundtable is designed to have these conversations and to get in the public mind the need for reform. Now, is it also designed to bring this back into the conversation and get public momentum behind this?
There'll be people suspicious, I'm sure, that this is all part of a stitch up to bring back negative gearing capital gains tax. I don't know if it is.
There were criticisms from the Jobs Summit. Some corporate figures we know criticised the Jobs Summit the government held in the first term. They felt that it was preordained and that they were stitched up. Now, there's people are insisting that there is no preordained arrangement here, but clearly the government wants to build momentum and consensus around ideas. Remember when the Treasurer was at the Press Club, he emphasised he wanted the people who were being invited to this roundtable, and there's a small select group, to build consensus among themselves before they get there. So he's encouraging people to have conversations around some of these controversial ideas and work out, is there a common ground that can be reached before they get to sit around the table?
What about the idea itself, John, that we just heard there? It is different to what Labor under Bill Shorten's idea was. You could only negative gear a newly built, a newly constructed home, right, to encourage new building. This idea is, I guess, a bit simpler. Grandfather everything for 5 years, and then after that, you only get one property.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's new or old. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I mean, I think it's healthy we're debating tax, whether it's negative gearing capital gains or company tax. That's a good thing we're having a discussion about it because it's overdue. But I don't think we should kid ourselves that reforming negative gearing on capital gains tax is going to actually solve the housing crisis. I mean, all the academic studies from Grattan, Centre for Independent Studies, other progressive groups as well, show that negative gearing capital gains tax only add about 1 to 4% of to the prices of houses. Sure, it could be part of a broader discussion around taxes, but I don't think we should kid ourselves it's going to solve housing affordability.
No, and in fairness, there's all sorts of things like approvals and so on that need to happen to get more stock built.
Yeah.
But this measure, I think Sally McManus said it would be $1.5 billion a year in extra tax revenue that that could be raised.
I think the big thing it deals with, and Sally McManus was very much focusing on the sort of housing crisis element, because I think that's front of mind for people, but I take your point in terms of a lot of the research. One of the biggest issues it addresses is intergenerational wealth and the sort of tax concessions which older generations have enjoyed for a very long time. And if you look at the election result, not just Labor's enormous numbers, but actually the way young people are increasingly voting and the concerns that they're raising, I think that if we continue to talk about 2019 as if it's like the benchmark, like we had a referendum on these ideas and it's set and forget, I think we're living in fantasy land, because our reality this year compared to 2019, a pandemic happened, Generation Z and Y are basically the dominant electoral force. Things have changed, my friends.
It started off as a productivity summit. Now productivity is one of the 3 days.
Yeah.
And there is a concern amongst, I spoke to 3 CEOs this week, it's morphing into a tax hike summit. The guest speaker who's going to speak about tax, the CEO of the Grattan Institute, has advocated for higher taxes on capital gains, negative gearing, other things around superannuation and stuff. So there is a feeling this is the direction it's moving in. I guess the question is, what are the trade-offs going to be? If we're going to have a discussion about potentially increasing some taxes, Jim Chalmers has said he ideally wants this to be revenue neutral or improve the budget bottom line, but he's also spoken in his National Press Club address about wanting to take pressure off the income tax base, i.e. maybe give some sort of relief to income tax.
I guess that's the easy part to do, though, right? Lowering income taxes.
Well, if there's a trade-off, maybe
the hard part is finding
easier.
the taxes that need to raise. I think PK's point is a good one, though, about what's changed since 2019. You know, the generational change, we're seeing that in the election results with the younger voters, but their frustration over being locked out of the housing market is only building, and they often do reference people who've got multiple negatively geared properties.
Yep, and the government will face an election again in 3 years' time. And so they have a political imperative to be, not only be seen to be acting and responding to that generational question, but to achieve change that is visible.
They'd have to take something like this to an election, wouldn't they?
Well, they would, and you know, Sally McManus's idea is a 5-year grandfathering, so the impact of it in terms of the real impact of it is a way down the track, isn't it?
Yep.
But people are going to be wanting to feel an improvement, see an improvement, feel like something has actually changed by the time of the next election. That is the huge political challenge.
On that Productivity Commission idea on company tax, John, what did you make of that proposal? And just tell us briefly how it went down, how the business groups, you know, the smaller ones were happier, and then they all got together and knocked their heads together and said, no, we've got to stick together, we've got to be united here, and issued a statement.
It's quite a radical proposal. So slash the company rate from 30% for most companies to 20%.
Big drop.
If you're turning over $1 billion or less, but then introduced this new 5% cash flow tax on all companies, which effectively means an overall tax increase for 500 of Australia's biggest companies. So you can imagine the big end of town is very worried about that. It came out of the blue. It's a surprise. I can see where the Productivity Commission's trying to head, because they want to try and move towards more a cash flow system where you're rewarding new business investment. But it's actually layering on a new tax on top of the existing system. It raises questions around complexity.
But with a deduction for investment as well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But is it targeting? Like it's 500 companies. It's pretty broad. Like I think tax economists typically, like Ken Henry, have suggested actually you cut the company tax rate for nearly everyone, but you have a higher resource rent tax on the miners. Some people would suggest you could increase the big bank.
Whereas
this is not very well.
No.
Well, I got a
idea,
statement from Ken Henry. He said it's well worth considering the right direction. I don't think he's endorsing the exact model,
No, not the exact, but the direction it's taking, because it's actually like a super profits tax. Though,
yeah, but on 500 companies rather than targeting just specific sectors.
It includes Coles and Woolies, for example. If they're hit with an extra 5%, sure, they might be able to deduct it a bit with investment in capital, but are they going to pass on to consumers?
I don't think it's going to, like the Business Council says it'll lead to higher prices for consumers. I don't think that's true, frankly, because profits taxes don't lead to higher prices for consumers. I think tax economists know that. What it does do is it can potentially reduce investment, and all the studies show, contrary to what Sally McManus said, that a lower company tax increases investment, leads to higher real wages for workers. I mean, Ken Henry's study showed that from his review, a mountain of evidence from overseas as well. So we shouldn't lose sight of that as well.
Sure, but if they're going for a reduction in tax, which is a huge reduction, they're trying to, you got to offset it somewhere, right? So that's the design here.
Well, they've been constrained because Jim Chalmers said this has got to be revenue neutral.
Yes.
And the Commission has interpreted that as well. It's got to be revenue neutral within the company tax system. Right. So you can't consider GST, land tax, other things as well.
Good chat about tax on a Sunday morning.
It's so good. It feels good, doesn't it, guys?
On artificial intelligence, I find this fascinating, this area. It's coming at the government, coming at governments all around the world, whether they like it or not, right? We're already seeing it. The CommBank, you know, everyone watching will have an experience they can point to.
Atlassian as well this week. I mean, it's happening.
The union movement's call for a new body, a new authority to basically approve workplace agreements on how to roll out AI. I don't get the sense the government's keen on that idea. Jim Chalmers seems to be one of those, the Treasurer, who is, I mean, he says, more optimistic than others about the role that AI is going to play.
I believe that we can maximise the opportunity and manage the risks. I'm certainly alive to the risks in the labour market, but historically what we've seen, big changes in technology, and this one will be transformational. It'll be a game changer in the economy. I believe it shouldn't be beyond us, and it's not beyond us, to work out the best version of this for Australia, including for Australian workers.
So a glass half full approach from the Treasurer at the moment on AI, John. It is interesting. I mean, Donald Trump is sort of taking a let it rip approach. And I think this superpower competition between the US and China on who can get the furthest, the fastest on AI is really going to be on. But what do you think? Will Australia take a more measured approach here, put more guardrails around?
Well, I think it's good the Treasurer's embracing this as an opportunity to increase productivity, living standards, overall real wages. I don't think we can withstand the international forces that are happening here. Look, there is concern from the business community that the ACTU is using this as a bit of a Trojan horse to impose new workplace regulation, such as forcing management to consult with workers or negotiate with workers and basically having a veto right from the employee side on imposing new technology. They've wanted to do this for many years, and now they're using AI as the front to try and achieve that.
Now, the Trump tariffs, I want to touch on that as well. Australia remains at a 10% baseline tariff, and the Trade Minister, Don Farrell, is taking some credit on behalf of the government.
I think this is a vindication for the Albanese government, and particularly the Prime Minister, in the cool and calm way that we have conducted diplomacy with the United States.
Maybe it is, PK. Maybe it's also got a fair bit to do with the fact the US has a trade surplus with Australia. We buy more of their stuff, and for everybody in that situation, it seems they've stuck with a 10% baseline.
It's obviously largely, predominantly everything to do with the fact that we're in that situation, and we are just lucky that we landed with this 10% rate and that Trump was being advised, you know, it depends who last gets in his ear, but not to go beyond the 10% to the 15 or the 20%. So lucky. But to give the government some credit, it has played, despite calls from the opposition and others that it go, you know,
do a deal and
that the Prime Minister get on his knees and sort of say, Donald Trump, what can we give you to deal with this? To go down, you know, to really, you know, lay low on some of this. That's been the strategy, actually. Let's just, and so column A, column B, we ended up in a good spot.
It does.
I mean, we don't want the 10% one either.
Well, this is the thing. I mean,
realistically,
should we be celebrating a 10% baseline tariff from our closest ally, Karen?
Well, no, but nobody's got anything better than that, have they?
Exactly.
I'm not sure what it says about the Prime Minister's powers of in-person persuasion, that being quiet and not having a meeting has given us the best possible outcome.
But it does take some pressure off him on that front.
Of course.
The pressure off, you know, what's Kevin Rudd doing? I mean, we've done all right here.
Sometimes less is more.
Indeed, that's right. We have done all right here, and they should be pleased at that outcome. But we can't be certain it won't change.
Also, wait, there's more to come. I mean, what we're going to, like, that's just the blanket tariff. We have got pharmaceutical tariffs coming down the line potentially.
It could change any day.
Yeah, so
with Donald
clearly
Trump
there is still a need.
Every other day we hear
engage
something
with the
different on the
US.
trade front. One thing I just wanted to note, John, and I'm not sure if you've been watching this, what's happening in the courts on Trump tariffs, and the court there, well, it's going through various courts, probably will end up in the Supreme Court as to whether he's overstepped his constitutional power as president in imposing all of these tariffs. I mean, boy, if they get knocked out by the Supreme Court, this sets up a real clash between the executive and the judicial branches like we haven't seen.
Yeah, I mean, there are big questions whether he's illegal. He's using national security powers, administrative powers of the president. Of course, he's appointed, I think, at least 3 Supreme Court judges there as well. So he has sort of stacked the court to a certain degree. It's not to say that those judges will necessarily side with him on tariffs, but there is quite a few Conservatives bent to that court as well.
Yeah, that will be fascinating if they go against Donald Trump on what is the centrepiece of his economic agenda, these tariffs. We will see. All right, our panel, Patrica Karvelas, John Kehoe and Karen Middleton, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mark Humphries and Talking Pictures.
Hello there, I'm Mark Humphries, host of the new binge documentary Sold, and I'm filling in this week for Mike Bowers. I'm talking pictures with journalist and host of the radio show and podcast Fourth Estate, Tina Quinn. Welcome to Talking Pictures, Tina.
Nice to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Tina, there's been a change in the political climate with some Nats pushing for an end to net zero. Brett Lethbridge here in Nationals country. Barnaby Joyce has got net zero in his sights. Are we still fighting the climate wars?
I think Barnaby definitely is. I mean, he's got his rifle ready and he's managed to shoot a number of different cans. I'm not sure which cans they are, but he's shot down a number. Net zero is the last one.
He's still fighting. David Pope down on Susan's farm.
So you let them range free and then they return home to lay.
Exactly. It's the only humane way to herd cats.
Well, I really love all these little thought bubbles, you know, in the background. Net zero, Netanyahu. Is there a meow there?
There's one meow.
Yeah. Okay.
Do they know they're in a coalition? I feel like sometimes they just look at other members and go, hang on, we're together on this, are we? Oh, okay.
I don't think I've seen an unhappier pairing since Charles and Di, I gotta say. And speaking of...
Yes, Matt Golding here with 2 mismatched jigsaw puzzle pieces.
I think he could have also just made these like 2 square pegs, not just 2 jigsaw puzzles that don't fit.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the Liz Taylor and Richard Burton of breakups, right? They just keep getting back together and splitting up and getting back together.
Susan Lee here in the piece by Johannes Leek, Danger Quicksand.
Most importantly, we've hit the ground running, but unfortunately it's the ground that she's hit running is quicksand, which is...
Who'd be an opposition leader after an election loss? I mean...
Only a woman, so yes.
And Tina, as things go rapidly downhill in Gaza, world leaders are being asked to step up. This piece by Glenn Lever, quite powerful.
You know, obviously calls to mind the axe or the fire extinguisher that's behind that glass partition. We only use it in emergencies. And here we have a backbone, you know, underneath a glass partition of sanctions. So will anybody actually break it?
Kathy Wilcox with a sort of spectrum of world leaders here. We have Macron, we will recognise Palestine.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer, we will recognise Palestine unless Israel stops killing Palestinians.
And our leader, of course, will recognise Palestine when we're ready, if there are any Palestinians left.
And I mean, I love that Kathy Wilcox has titled this Gestures. I was floored by Keir Starmer's pronouncement this week. I've never seen foreign diplomacy quite like it. It was, if you don't do what we want, Israel, we're going to recognise a Palestinian state. Do you remember when your mum, you wouldn't eat your greens as a kid and she said no ice cream for dinner?
Oh, yes.
It sort of calls to mind that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kathy Wilcox, she's got this is a real interview. So this was between Sally Sarah on the ABC and Dan Tehan. Yes. Dan saying, we'd like to see the facts. Those are not the facts we'd like to see. UN reports, humanitarian agencies, doctors.
And this big box, the weight of evidence, which as journalists is what we're supposed to be following, right? They weren't quite the facts he was wanting.
He's got a very high bar, Dan Tehan.
Very high bar.
And the debate over screen time has flared up again as the government seeks to ban social media for under 16s. David McArthur here in the Hobart Mercury. Have you seen these NAPLAN results? What's he been doing all day?
Searching YouTube videos on how to get around the YouTube ban.
You know what? It may not be effective, but at least it's symbolic.
Well, I love that the Wiggles have actually entered the debate on this. Yeah, I mean, they're pro-YouTube.
Not Jeff, he's half asleep, isn't he?
No, usually, which led to the Prime Minister saying one of my favourite declarative statements that he's ever made, in that he's pro-Wiggle.
Well, Tina Quinn from Fourth Estate, it's been a delight talking pictures with you this week, and I'll let you do the honours.
I think that means it's back to you, David.
Tina, thank you. Thank you, Mark, as well. Let's get some final observations. PK.
Just on the Closing the Gap report this week, that Bridget made some excellent points earlier, we now have a report which shows Indigenous incarceration, suicide, these things are getting worse. And we have a Northern Territory government that is introducing measures that we know as fact will make these things worse. Why do we have targets that as governments we are actively, knowingly producing outcomes that take it backwards? It was under 10 years ago we had a Royal Commission. It said it was, found that spit hoods shouldn't be used. The NT government has this week introduced them again. I think there needs to be a reckoning around this and federal funding for a jurisdiction that does not follow the evidence when it comes to the most vulnerable children in this country.
All right, John.
David, the media and political debate in Australia is being dominated by what's happening in Gaza. Now, that's understandable. There's a humanitarian crisis there. But I think we also need to be honest in Australia that we have virtually zero or very little influence on what actually happens there. And the Prime Minister has actually acknowledged that. Meanwhile, issues in Australia that people are elected to Parliament and do have direct policy lever control over. I point to, we've got an education crisis. We had awful NAPLAN results out this week again. We've got a stagnating standard of living because we haven't had any productivity growth in this country for 7 or 8 years. And we've got a tax system that's actively working against the interest of younger generations. We're accumulating debt that they're going to inherit as well. So I think we need to keep up the onus on the policy things and political things our elected MPs actually have the ability to control.
I'm glad we had a tax debate this morning then listening to that.
Tell us what you really think.
Firstly, just quickly back to the timing of recognition and whether or not it would happen before the General Assembly in September. The one thing that suggests it might is that if there is a vote on recognition at the General Assembly, how will Australia vote? It's not going to want to abstain or vote against it. That might suggest it's better if they've made their declaration beforehand. What I wanted to say quickly is there was an interesting story on news.com.au a couple of days ago suggesting that the police commissioner, Reece Kershaw, may be about to resign, and that suggesting there's still some unhappiness around the handling of that caravan of explosives, the hoax terrorist plot. Also, in some context there was recently an ombudsman's report on complaints handling in the AFP that was absolutely scathing and said it had got particularly bad in the last 6 years. That's how long Reece Kershaw has been there. They've put pressure on the AFP to make a referral to the National Anti-Corruption Commission of systemic corruption around one issue within the AFP. Now, the government has said in response to that they have full confidence in him, but that's interesting background against whether we see a resignation or a reappointment.
That will be one to watch. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, I'm no social media expert. This is well known. But I have checked with those who are, and there does seem to be some widespread head-scratching over exactly what Labor MPs are trying to do with some of the stuff they've been pumping out in the first 2 weeks of Parliament. We'll leave you to make your own decision. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Jerome.
Hey, Sal.
Is this illegal? Hey, it feels illegal. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that we've been doing around getting the surcharges on debit cards banned?
I hope they play hot to go. Mate, this is Australian Parliament House.
Thank you very much.
No worries. I'm just gonna die.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.